All right, thanks everybody for joining us today for the CSA Cloud Bytes webinar. Nikhil and I are going to talk about a smarter approach to protecting your cloud, data, and AI. So we're going to spend just the next little bit kind of talking about our approach from our experience on ways that you can protect your cloud security and your data security in a way that just really makes sense for enterprises. Before we get started, let's do a quick introduction. I'll introduce myself. My name is Tim Chase. I am a global field CISO at Lacework. My background is really in the cloud security, application security, data security space. I have been doing that for probably about 15, 17 years, something like that. And I've also been a CISO a couple of times. So I've had to build these programs out from scratch. And so just a lot of what we'll talk about today from my perspective will be things that I have learned over the years. I've been at Lacework for about 2.5 years, and I actually live in Nashville. So I'll hand it over to Nikhil.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everybody. I'm Nikhil Gill, the Senior Director of Data and AI Security and Governance at Security. Similar to Tim, I've been in cybersecurity and data security for the last 10 plus years. Prior to that, I was a developer. So kind of come in from the perspective of cyber teams as well as kind of the developers on the receiving end and partners to cybersecurity. And at Security, our mission really is to help you all enable safe use of data and AI. So really looking forward to this conversation, and we'll be touching on a lot of such practices today. So as we kind of talk about, right, Tim mentioned, we're going to talk about how do you secure your critical assets, cloud, data, and AI. And from an attacker perspective, oftentimes what the people are going after is your sensitive data. And this sensitive data protection is really kind of a board level conversation. No matter where you are in cybersecurity, right? You're kind of hearing this question from the top, right? Your board, your CEO, CISO, CIO, everybody wants to know, okay, how are we protecting our data? Is my data safe? And they in turn are getting these questions from your customers, right? Your sales, your business depends on it. Your customers want to know what are the best practices and controls and guardrails you're putting around it. And there's also regulation, right? Like all the top level board executives, and they have obligations to regulators. Like SEC has enforced control. If something goes wrong, you gotta let them know. So it's really a top level conversation. So when the conversation actually comes to our infosec teams, and people are asking, "Oh, is data safe?" That's not an easy answer because first of all, you need to know, okay, where is sensitive data? What is sensitive data in your organization? And the challenge really is data is everywhere and it's growing exponentially, right? Especially all of the things that have happened in the past. Think about the cloud and the DevOps adoption, right? The velocity has grown exponentially. And now with AI, it's even beyond control. So data is in different multi-cloud environment, public clouds, your data lakes and warehouses, in your different on-premises locations and sites, your SaaS applications. And the latest kind of beast is all the AI models, right? These are highly compressed data sets, potentially containing sensitive data, right? So where is sensitive data sprinkled in these environments? An extremely difficult question to answer. Now, even if you know have that visibility, what you want to know is, okay, in order to know whether data is safe, what are the different points of attack? How are the attackers thinking, trying to get in, right? And the attack surface is really broad. How do you monitor that, right? Ways of getting in through your application code, your workload vulnerabilities. Think about all of the OS top-down issues, your container workloads, configuration, the systems, and compromised credentials. So many different ways for an attacker to get in. Like, do you know how is somebody go and get to your data? And in order to kind of get some kind of control, you're thinking internally, okay, I got to build all these policies to prevent these attacks. Um, and that's all great. You need to think about actions and how do you implement them. But is just implementing policies enough, right? If you recall, the conversation starts with risk. The organization wants to know, and the stakeholders want to know: is my data safe? And oftentimes, you have to kind of translate your cybersecurity speak to kind of the language that the common industry will understand, right? And oftentimes the definition of risk aligns to, okay, hey, the board says, okay, we want to be aligned to NIST across the whole organization. Or if you're a healthcare organization, your customers are looking at, okay, are you HIPAA compliant? So you're looking at different lenses of regulation and frameworks to define and report on risk, right? So not an easy problem at all. But as you kind of think about this program solving these challenges, you gotta stay alert on the side, right? Different incidents that are happening. How do you respond to an incident? Is something critical? How do you know that, right? And if, God forbid, if something goes wrong, and there is a possibility that attacker once in a while will break in, how do you manage the impact of a breach in a kind of a regulatory manner in a much more judicious approach? So a lot of different challenges, as we mentioned, these are the things we're going to talk about today. And Tim is now going to walk us through a framework for addressing these problems.
Yeah, I love that slide, Nikhil, because I think ultimately what we're trying to do is secure the data because we as cybersecurity professionals tend to stick down in the cloud and want to secure the cloud, but the business executives don't quite understand that, right? They understand risk, and so like understanding the data to me is one of the key ways to help make that translation to go from security risk to board risk. So I really like that slide. And one of the things that I have learned over the years is kind of, how do you go about managing this risk, right? So if we've acknowledged that data is important for your cloud security, well, how do you go about managing that risk, understanding it, and then ultimately um, resolving and identifying incidents when they do happen? Because a lot of what we see, with the regulatory frameworks that are out there, like if you want to go with some of the new government ones, like the SEC regulations or the DORA and the EU, or even just some of the ones that we have today with NIST and SOC 2, right? One of the things that we have to really deal with is the investigation and the notify part, right? And a part of determining what we have to notify on really depends on the type of data that's affected. So what's kind of a way and a path that you can help deal with this risk? Well, we're going to talk about each one of these steps individually and really do a deep dive into them. The first one is identify the vulnerable attack path. So just kind of understanding, where am I vulnerable? Where is my data vulnerable? Where do I have potential vulnerabilities that allow the exploitation of my data? And then prioritizing the sensitive data. So once you understand where potentially you might be vulnerable, you might have a large attack surface that you have to try and figure out, like, what do I do next? Well, you can take the data that you have and really help prioritize some of your vulnerabilities and things you're going to work on based on the type of data that's affected, right? Um, and then fixing what's out there, right? So automating the policies to look for the data and ultimately remediating the issues, whether that's through manual remediation, through notification, or auto remediation. How can we do that? And all of that will enable you to comply with these complex regulations, right? So understanding the data and then having kind of an understanding of where the data is and being prepared to respond and do notifications in case of an incident. That's where we'll talk about complying with the regulations. And then finally, how do you investigate incidents and notify breaches, right? So if you were to have something happen inside of your environment, if your cloud environment were breached, if your data were breached, how do we do investigations and how do we notify? And why is the data security important aspect of all of that? And so the first part is identifying the attack paths. And you really, when you're doing any type of threat modeling, in essence, the first thing that you have to do is think like an attacker, right? Some of the best pen testers and security analysts that I know have the ability to put themselves in the mindset of an attacker. And so the way that you do that is in essence, um, you create this attack path, right? This threat model that helps you understand what are the potential attack paths to my resources that I have. The first step of anything, I think, of security 101 is, what is my cloud inventory, right? You can't secure what you don't know about. So the first step is discover my cloud inventory. We need real-time visibility into all the different types of cloud services, right? So having a way to query either one cloud provider or multiple cloud providers. Most people are multi-cloud these days, and just understand what services am I using? What resources do I have in the cloud? Am I using um, EC2s or compute instances that are out there? Am I using database as a service, PaaS? Do I have buckets or blob storage that are out there? Or am I using the AI services? That's something that we're more and more concerned about in security. So the first step is really get this cloud inventory um, of everything that you have in your environment across the multi-cloud and across multi-account. And then the next step is detect the different types of vulnerabilities, right? So once you have your inventory and you know what's out there, well, start scanning for the vulnerabilities. And that can take place in multiple places. It can be code security issues. So um, if you've got maybe misconfigurations in your infrastructure as code, or what if you have you're using vulnerable libraries inside of your code, or maybe you have application security issues where maybe you've got SQL injection or things like that that make your application vulnerable. So getting an understanding of those. The workload vulnerabilities as well. So obviously the perfect example of this is Log4j. That's something that we talked about for a long time, but those exist. So when you're running workloads out there, when you're running containers, are you building those containers from a vulnerability free image? Are there any 0 days that you really have to think about? Understand what your workload vulnerabilities are, and really you should be doing that in both places. You should be doing that kind of in your pipeline on the left side, if you will, and you should also be doing it in production to understand what is running. Um, Security posture issues, kind of the same thing, right? So when you think it's posture issues, it's really kind of misconfigurations. Do I have all of my AWS accounts set up correctly? Do I have MFA enabled for everybody? Do I have security groups that are wide open? Am I leaving ports open that I don't intend to? Things like that. And once again, covering those uh, in the build time with your infrastructure as code, but also doing it in runtime where you're looking for those postures in all of your accounts across all of your clouds. And then finally, IAM issues, right? So this is one of the most the most important topics I think of that we're seeing today is people are looking at their identities and how they're managing their identities in the cloud. And so, um, understanding any IAM issues that you might have. Am I over permissioning some of my users? Do they have permissions they don't need to use? The same thing with workloads. So understanding the different types of vulnerabilities once you have your inventory is really step two. And then you can visualize the different paths that an attacker can break in. If you understand, just to use this particular diagram here, if you've got an EC2 instance that you know about, well, you can understand the security groups that are attached to it, right? Because you understand the IAM, you understand that there's one critical vulnerability associated with that EC2 instance, so on and so forth. So once you have the inventory and you understand the vulnerabilities, then you can build out the attack paths, which really help you um, visualize and understand where should I be prioritizing? Where do I have the most risk in my attack paths? So that's the way that you kind of think about an attacker. That's kind of the first step when you're identifying the attack paths, and then you take it to the next step, which is prioritizing the data risk.
Absolutely, right. And once you kind of have the perspective of the attacker, the basic best practice you need is kind of start prioritizing this by the lens of sensitive data, right? Okay, the example that Tim shared, okay, you've got a potential exposure of an S3 bucket, but the question you want to ask is, okay, is that critical information? If the bucket doesn't contain sensitive data, or it contain, let's say, public information that's supporting your website content, you don't care about that, right? You want to know, is something sensitive that you care about exposed? And you want to do all such best practices check. That is basic hygiene around like not having your data exposed. But doing that is not trivial, right? Just finding sensitive data can be a very, very tricky exercise for various reasons that we covered earlier, right? First of all, there's like extreme massive volume and kind of variety of data systems you need to look at. Just in cloud, there are hundreds of services, right? I'm not even talking about the data on-prem, SaaS, and other environments that you need to grip over. Uh, and then you need to think about various shadow data systems. Like many organizations over the years have kind of taken on these cloud migration projects, right? You've taken your legacy databases, all the systems and volumes to the cloud running in different servers, right? Where do they show up? They don't show up in your cloud console, not in your kind of different platforms, right? So do you know they exist? Are you kind of scanning those environments? Think about all the dark data systems, right? Files that have been backed up and replicated over the years, right? They may contain sensitive information, but nobody is monitoring them. So you need that comprehensive inventory of your data assets. But within those kind of assets, you need to think about various formats and structures. You need to see all your structured data systems, data lakes and warehouse tables and schemas, and unstructured, right? Especially unstructured become extremely critical in the world of Gen AI, right? All the organizations are realizing, okay, until now you were using AI for your kind of predictive analysis on structure. Now you need to understand your unstructured data. So you need to understand the discovery and classification across these, right? And within there, you also need to kind of look at, we talked about various lenses of risk. Okay, you're a healthcare organization. Can you find where is your kind of HIPAA specific data or EU resident data from a GDPR lens? You need hundreds of different classifiers from the lens, whatever lens you're using to identify sensitive data. You may even have your kind of company IP data, your design documents, your code documents. You need to kind of classify those accurately. And talking about unstructured, think about not just kind of, it's easy to kind of look at your documents, PDFs, but all the obscure formats, right? Images that you have collected over the years, right? Your call center, maybe you have a call center, right? Uh, you're doing authentication, identification. Okay, tell me your date of birth, last four digits of your social number, right? A lot of this critical information sits in these hard to digest formats, right? MP4 and video files and audio files. Do you have visibility into all of that sensitive data? And think about all of your application code. We're talking about different kind of injection and attacks from the kind of software vulnerability standpoint, but all the machine data, formats like Avro or Parquet, like all of this data is kind of a equally critical target of attack. So you need that visibility in order to know, okay, is somebody going to be able to break into something sensitive? And you got to be able to do all that with a reasonably high level of accuracy, right? What you don't want to do is kind of, okay, you're tagging everything as kind of critical using kind of basic techniques. Okay, I'm going to use pattern matching. So, okay, this looks like a name, this looks like a last name. That is probably the worst thing you can do for your developer and your data system owners, right? If you're flooding them with false positives, they're simply going to start ignoring your alert. So you need really high level of fidelity. Think about different things like if you're using, let's say, images, you need OCR analysis. For highly sensitive document, you may want to train your system to look for specific documents which are relevant to your company, or use exact data matching indexes, or use machine learning for contextual and contextual classification of documents. So I can't emphasize more, right? Accuracy is very, very critical, especially if you're kind of relying on those classification to monitor your alerts and threats that are coming in. The other piece is you're also kind of looking at context beyond just discovery and classification, right? The example Tim shared was that of a kind of a attack potentially coming in, but you have to look at data from multiple lenses. So if you are, let's say, a bank and you're collecting a lot of customer information, okay, you want to know, is my social security number, which is data element, secure? Now that leads to a whole different level of investigation. Okay, where do I store different social security number in different data systems and tables and kind of files? All the kind of PDFs I've collected from my customers in different locations. Maybe you have opened a new site or you have expanding to a new region. You don't have proper security controls. You need that kind of context as well. Okay, who in my organization has access to social security numbers? Is this in line with my company policy or my kind of regulatory requirements? Uh, whose data am I collecting, right? So from a data subject perspective, so you need to be able to ask all of these questions about your data. Essentially, what you need is a knowledge graph, right? Simple data classification is not enough. You need like Google search to be able to query all of these perspectives and make decisions based on that. And finally, Tim alluded to this, right? Like AI is kind of, we call it out separately because this is probably one of the most vulnerable attack vectors in terms of systems that you're going to have in your organization. Uh, Almost every single company is kind of experimenting or putting some kind of AI in production.